to Breaking into Tech. I'm really excited to do another episode this week. And this week, our guest is Josh, and he's going to be talking about his experience going through Sabio's coding boot camp, not just recently, but 4 years ago. So it'll be an interesting conversation to hear your story. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Amanda. And it was almost 4 years ago. I went in mid 2019, so it's been a little bit. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. No, it'll be great to hear not only about your experience, but what you've learned since graduating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been definitely a lot. The first couple years definitely feel a little bit underwater, but I would say as of late, I feel just a little bit more comfortable.
You also had to go through the pandemic shortly after graduating.
Yeah, I did. So luckily, after 2019, well, I went mid 2019, and a few weeks after graduating, luckily I found the job pretty quickly, and then found like a second job shortly after that. And then you're right, early of 2020, I was at Kaiser. The pandemic hit, and then just been working remotely since.
Wow. All right, well, we're getting ahead of ourselves. So let's get back to your background. Tell us a little bit about who you are, if you have any military service, and just who you are.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Josh Samaniego. I'm a SoCal native. Grew up in Whittier, so I've been here my whole life. Went to school at Loyola Marymount University, which is West LA, and then um, no military background. I actually was trying to get into the medical field for a while, so I majored in like a health and human science, what like a biokinesics type of major, and even did the whole deal where I shadowed doctors, shadowed physical therapists. Thought that was the route for me. Realized it wasn't, and then somehow found my way into teaching, and I taught high school math for a year. And kudos to all those to all the teachers out there. It's a difficult job and doesn't pay enough. And I actually met someone at a coffee shop when I was teaching, and he was a software engineer, and he mentioned that it's a career I might enjoy. And that was the first time I had ever really heard about any type of career in development. So I did some research, and that's how I was first kind of exposed into the tech field.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think software engineering is something that is kind of hidden, and then when you find out about it, you're like, it's everywhere. It like
Yeah,
bombards
exactly.
you. But you're
Hmm.
like, where was this all my life? I had no
That's right.
idea.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing then you didn't have any coding experience before you started at Sabio.
None professionally. So I actually did some self-learning initially when I was first, told, hey, you might enjoy this. So I bought some books on Python actually. Or, you do your Google searches as far as like which language is best to start off with. And so in 2018, late 2018, I did some Python stuff. I was doing Codecademy, and that was all before Sabio, because back when I went to Sabio, they had a pre-work that you had to complete before starting the boot camp. So the pre-work started around April, I would say. So I did a few months of self-studying, but it wasn't anything professional.
Awesome. And how you kind of told us how you learned about the world of coding, but how did you learn about Sabio?
Yeah, so that we were talking about that right before I hopped on the call. Thinking back to 2019, I think back then doing Google searches is how to break into the tech industry, and a lot of people were recommending boot camps as an option. So of course, I think I typed in boot camps in LA and was taken to websites like Course Report, SwitchUp. I mean, it's been years since I've looked at them, but Sabio was always at the top of the list, especially for LA based. I know ever since the pandemic, Sabio has expanded a lot more, but when I was looking at it, we had to go in person. So Sabio was one of the top ones that popped up. I think I did my research. I went to an info session. Liliana was actually there for that info session. I remember she was hosting the info sessions like every hour or so, and we had me and a buddy of mine actually uh, talked to her, and that's how we first found out about it.
Yeah, that's crazy to hear like that she was so involved in the info sessions, but it makes sense. Like you're growing your business, you have to wear a lot of hats, and as they've grown, they've expanded. And I got to interview some of the people who are leading info sessions today, and so that's really cool to hear.
Yeah, it was. It's crazy to see how much it's grown in the best of ways.
Yeah. Yeah, and Liliana is the CEO and co-founder, so if you're listening, you're like, "Who is she? Who is he talking about?"
Yeah.
Yeah, so she's played a pivotal role in helping make Sabio happen and continues to, and I mean, she's the reason that we have Breaking into Tech and we're talking to graduates. It's all because of her, so yeah.
That's right.
So, you said that you were teaching and then you found out about software engineering. Why did you decide I like teaching, but it's really hard, but, I need something different. Like, why did you decide to make the jump into software engineering?
Oh, I think one of the biggest reasons was I fell in love with it right away. A lot of people say, "Oh, it's lucrative. You could get paid a lot," which is true. But I loved it. Every challenge I encountered and solving problems was just really exciting for me. Even coming from like a math background, math and science background, where I just love challenging topics and learning and growing. And software engineering has that, where every day you're learning and every day you're growing. And plus, it's a nice perk that it also pays well, and it teaching was really brutal, and I don't think I could have continued past a couple years of teaching, and everything just kind of lined up.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that coding is really interesting because there's always different problems and different challenges and you're always learning, and so I think that's a really good way to describe it, and I took a C++
Oh,
class when I was in college, and I thought it was kind of weird, but now that I'm a blogger, I can read code, and I told my friend, "Oh, you just click this button and then you," and she's like, "How do you read this?" And I was like, "Oh, that's not a natural skill." So,
I know my wife passes by my screen sometimes, and she sees what she's like, that looks like gibberish. I have no idea what you're doing. Yeah,
yeah, she's like, "How do you find the error in the code?" I was like, "I don't know, you just read it." But
yeah, yeah.
and it was that basic class that I took where I learned how to read the basics of code, and
Mhm.
it's been a skill that's helped me throughout my career, even though I'm not doing software engineering as a career, but it's still something that's so important. And I think, um, and probably one of the most important classes I took in college, and I didn't even realize it, and I
Yeah.
didn't enjoy it.
Yeah. It's actually really interesting because when I first started to learn how to code, I started applying a lot of these fundamentals of programming into my daily life, right? Like even thinking like, all right, don't repeat yourself. How can I make sure I do this once so I don't repeat myself over and over again, right? Like little things that uh, you wouldn't think would translate into everyday life has translated from me learning how to code.
Yeah, I feel like that's a good blog post. How coding can relate to your daily life. That's really good. I love that. So you went to an info session, you talked to Liliana, and after that, is that when you decided I'm gonna do this boot camp, and or was there more research that you did?
Definitely did more research. I think I went to info sessions for a few different boot camps, right? So I was trying to. It's a big investment. I felt right. Like you pay a certain amount of money to get this training, and I wanted to make sure that it would help me land the job, right? And so I did go to a few sessions, but I think what stood out for me with Sabio was first off, their statistics, their reviews, their instructors, and also the tech stack, which is full stack. And uh, I mean, there were so many other things, but I just felt right moving forward with Sabio.
Yeah, one of the people I recruited said, or I talked to, said that it's like you're baking the cake and you're decorating the cake, and you learn how to do all aspects and not just like how to bake a cake. You learn how to make it look pretty, how to decorate it, all these things. And she related that to like all the different options that you learn in Sabio. It's not just a cookie cutter, this is the only way, but you guys learn all different aspects so that you have lots of different options when you're ready to graduate.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And you can talk about the entire tech stack, and you know how it works from the ground up, which is I feel like missing from a lot of other boot camps.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So I like this question because I think it's so funny. What did you learn from Sabio's program besides everything?
I taught Well, besides the obvious, right? Like, hey, like, you you learn how to put code into action and actually build something, right? Because you can get lost in tutorial hell just learning about variables, loops, conditional, and then you're just like, how does this relate to the web? Like, what can I actually build? And with Sabio, you learn what to build and how to build it, and also important skills like figuring things out on your own, right? And coming prepared uh, with questions, but also some research to back up that, hey, you've looked into this on your own. You've really tried to do your very best to solve the problem before you come forward asking questions, which is a valuable skill. I mean, for the for the first year or a couple years, like I was mentioning, you just learn and grow so much. But learning how to, or knowing how to learn and figure out problems is such a huge skill.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think that their cohort program where you guys work together on a project really is one of the most valuable tools that I've heard about. So can you tell us a little bit about your cohort and what you guys were working on?
Yeah, sure. So back then, I think we were working on an e-commerce site for a company that wanted to recycle bicycles. So a lot of times, bicycles end up getting just dumped in a trash can or put out in front of your yard for somebody to take. And their whole mission was to create a platform where these bicycles could be sold. Yeah.
Yeah. I love the different hearing all the different cohorts and all the different programs that you guys have gotten to work on because so many of them have like a humanitarian or like an ecological connection that it's not just like, oh, we built this it's like we built this program and this is what it does and it's like, oh, that's really cool
Yeah.
and you guys get to do like stand-ups and work together as a team and so how was that experience in the whole program preparing you for when you got your job?
I think it gave me a model of the type of team and workflow that I would want to be a part of. Right? They introduce a lot of modern concepts into their stand-ups, their agile methodologies, sprints, tickets, and these are all ways that modern companies have their processes in place. Right? So my first few places, I realized, hey, maybe this isn't where I want to be because coming from Sabio, I was already expecting something different, right? I thought it'd be more collaboration or maybe more of an agile methodology with stand-ups. So it gives you that model to look for when you're job searching. Like, hey, this is what a good, well-structured company should run like.
That's an interesting perspective because I never really thought about how they're teaching you they're teaching you like how a good tech company should run and like if you get a job and it doesn't have to run exactly that, but if you like see missing pieces that make it so that you don't feel comfortable or you're like this could flow so much better if we had A, B, and C and you know what those are because you've learned from Savio. That's a really interesting perspective.
Yeah, yeah. It is because you don't know what you don't know, right? So if I wasn't given this experience, I would have never known. I'm like, oh, okay, great. Like the first job you're at, you may be like, oh, this is the way it's supposed to be, which isn't necessarily the case.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. I think that's one of the best parts about the things I've learned from doing these interviews with Sabio is that it's not like it's a coding boot camp, but it's so much more than that. It's not just like learning to code, it's learning how to work with other people, it's learning what, software engineers do, how they should operate. And so you come prepared into the job market for your first job with so much experience and it's not just education, it's the whole package, which I think is really great.
Right. Yeah. I feel like a lot of times people think you just have to be a whiz at coding, right? Or you just have to know every technical concept, when in reality, we talk to stakeholders all the time. We have to communicate daily. We have to work in teams. We have to collaborate. And it's all encompassing. Like with Sabi, I remember, I always had two or three people that I would turn to in my cohort to say, hey, can you help me debug this issue? And we'd look through the code together. Sometimes a fresh pair of eyes would be helpful, but you have to be able to communicate. And that's one of the things I find myself doing daily, right? Where we hop on calls with our teammates and we resolve issues, talk to product owners, and it's a lot more holistic than people think maybe from the outside.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about graduating from Sabio. What was it like? You said you found a job pretty quickly. So what did you do so that you could land that job?
Yeah, I think I found a job within like 2 or 3 weeks, which is pretty quickly. So I took the approach of just applying, like Sabio says, apply to a ton of places and see where that gets you. And I was also I think I got really lucky because I Indeed was having something back in the day. It was called, I think, Indeed Hired, or I don't think they have it anymore. But essentially, you put your profile there, and then somebody or companies can look at people's profiles and reach out if they feel like there's a connection there. It was like a new thing that I think Indeed was trying to roll out, and luckily, I put my resume in there, my info in there, and somebody reached out to me, and then we had that initial conversation, and uh, that's kind of how I got it. But I think it was a matter of me trying to find every opportunity in every place to put my resume out there and to speak to people. I was reaching out to people on LinkedIn, just trying to do that approach, which is was successful for me.
Yeah, and you mentioned at the beginning you didn't stay at that first job for very long because before the pandemic you already had a new job. So what was it like to like you were working and then finding another job?
Yeah, that I always think it's a lot easier once you're getting paid and once you're in a stable position. You have some leverage, right? Where you're not necessarily rushed to find another job, but you can still be a little more strategic, or I guess a little bit more picky, right? Because the first one out of the boot camp is usually breaking in is usually always the most difficult one. And then after that, it was just keeping communication with recruiters, right? So I was actually talking to a recruiter that was working with Kaiser, and I had initially interviewed like 6 months back, and it didn't end up working out. But the recruiter reached out to me around, I can't remember, March or April of that year of 2020, and said, "Hey, like Kaiser remembers you from that process or that interview process they had with them a few months back. They're wondering if you still want to come on board." And it was a matter of just keeping that connection alive and transitioning to that job with Kaiser.
That's such a good reminder that a no, it doesn't mean like no forever. And those interviews that you do that don't pan out, they aren't the end of the conversation. You can keep the conversation going. You can stay connected on LinkedIn, and maybe in the future, a door will open. And just being able to be open to that, it sounds like that's what happened for you. And that's such a good reminder that just because they say no doesn't mean it's like no forever.
Yeah, yeah, I see it as planting little seeds, right? That may not give you fruit right away, but eventually, eventually might come back to you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what things did you learn from your interviews that you did?
I learned that interviews vary widely. There's such a wide range of interviews, and it's kind of hard to predict what you're going to get asked, or what type of, or the interview format, right? Where some bigger tech-focused companies may ask you a lot of data structure algorithm questions, where some smaller mom and pop shops or companies that are mid-level, mid-size may just want to get to know you and your experience. But I learned that the best thing to do is to just be confident in what you know, and uh, communicate that you're a problem solver and a critical thinker, because it's, like I mentioned, technology is always changing. You're always learning and always growing. So that's one of the things I've always tried to communicate, and I feel like it's paid off for me.
Yeah. So, where am I gonna go? S- so it sounds like you've had like a lot of time since you. It's been almost 4 years since you started or graduated,
Mhm.
and now you're doing your job and you said you've learned a lot of things the first few years. So, what have you learned that you think people should know who are early in their career of doing software engineering?
Ooh. Well, there's a couple things that are non-technical, and some of that stuff is learn to identify which things are procedural versus which things are technical, right? Like a lot of times we're banging our head against the wall trying to solve a problem when in reality it's just the internal process that the company has. And then there's no way of you knowing unless you reach out to somebody to ask for help. So there's a fine line of when to ask for help and when to do the research on your own and problem solve, right? So the earlier that people can figure out what that fine line is or where that distinction is. I feel like that's one thing I wish I had learned earlier, right? The first couple of years could have just been a lot easier if I just asked somebody to hop on a quick call. I mean, obviously, with me doing some research initially and bringing things forward to the table. Another thing is, feel like when it comes to the technical side, just learning the command line and being comfortable with your tools. And a lot of people put some of that stuff on the back burner, like being familiar with the terminal. It can speed up your processes a lot more, and also just make you seem a lot more proficient. Another thing too is um, gain exposure to a lot of different areas of programming, right? Like a lot of people only focus on front end development, which is great, but then be familiar with cloud services, like how deployments work. Just the more you could be familiar with, I think it's going to give you more tools in your bag to hopefully be more marketable.
Yeah, and I really like the reaching out for help, and I think so many people are willing to help people, but they want to see that you did do the work of trying to solve the problem on your own, and they don't want you to spend hours and hours toiling away, like,
Right.
spend some time trying to find the answer, but then if you can't find it, they could probably answer it in 5 seconds, and you could spend hours and still not know the answer, but yeah,
Hmm.
I mean, I'm in my business, I love helping people who, are starting their own business, starting their podcast, but I want them to do some of the work on their own, like, figure out some of the things, and then when you get stuck, I can help you instead of, like, "How do I do everything?" I'm like, I can't start from, the very basics because, uh, it's just people, I think, in their nature, most people wanna help other people, especially if you're new to the company, they wanna help you succeed, and so finding that right balance of doing the research, but then also asking for help is so important.
Yeah, yeah, it is, and like you said, it's also the way you phrase it, right? Like if you tell somebody, "Hey, I see you're debugging a really difficult issue. Like, do you mind if I just hop on and just watch you do it?" Right? Because that's the best way to learn from others. Like me watching other people share their screen, I've picked up so many tips just from seeing them work their keyboard and their tools. So I think that that's invaluable having learning from senior engineers.
Yeah, that's a great way to ask questions because then you're not even taking their time. You're just seeing their screen while they're working on it and they're just
Mhm.
doing their job like normal. And so I love that question. That's really good. I love
Mhm.
that. So now we're going to go back a little bit farther in the advice frame of what advice would you give to someone who's considering a career in software engineering?
Ooh, okay. So it's funny because a lot of people come to me now, right? I've been in this industry for a while and have people always reaching out to me like, "Oh, I might be interested in coding," right? And so I think a couple tips of advice that I would give is look up some YouTube videos, right? Start maybe reading some documentation on it, playing around with code in it. I feel like in general, you could tell pretty early on if you're gonna like it, right? So one thing to know is if you like it and you feel like it can it can be a career move for you, then go for it because it's super rewarding, right? But that's another thing to keep in mind is that technology is always changing and it's you're always learning and growing, right? So if you're the type of person that doesn't want to keep learning and growing, then this may not be the right career for you, right? Where every day sometimes I wake up earlier to study or read up documentation or learn new things on the side. And another thing too is if you're considering it, right, find a way that you can break into that career. Like like Sabio, right? Go to a place that can give you the tools to find that first tech job, because you can definitely do it on your own. It'll just take a lot longer. It'll be a lot more difficult. You won't have resources or mentors or people to help guide you along that path. So do your research, and just know it's a rewarding journey, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah, I keep thinking about like strength finders, and like if your strength finder top 5 is learning, then it sounds like this would be a great career, but if your strength finder learning is in your bottom 5, it may not be the right fit.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And that's a theme that so many people have talked about, like continually learning. And that's one of my top 5 strength finders, and that's why I'm like, "Ooh, this sounds so exciting."
Yeah, definitely it fits in your top 5. Yeah, and also another one would be just being comfortable being uncomfortable. I don't know if that's necessarily a strength finder, but just know you're gonna be uncomfortable a lot, and that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another piece of great advice. And I always like to end the interview talking about where you see yourself in the future. Where do you see yourself in 2 to 5 years? And do you have any like long lost dream of starting your own tech startup?
um, in 2 to 5 years, I see myself. I love coding, so still being an individual contributor, right? By that point, I'll have 6 to 9 years of experience. So it's going to be a lot of knowledge under my belt, and hopefully maybe eventually get into some sort of management, maybe engineering management, but not 100% sure. I mean, I love coding at the moment, so that's I still want to be in a coding role. And as far as starting my own tech startup, sounds like a lot of work. I have 2 kiddos, and it's kind of hard to put in a lot of time outside of work. So I don't know if at the moment I would say I don't have any dreams to start my own tech startup just yet.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, starting a business is a lot of work, and even I liked how you said like I could be in like management, but I like doing the coding, and that is true. Like sometimes you move up into the management role and then you're managing people and you don't
Mhm.
get to do the hands-on stuff. So that's something to really think about when you're moving up your career.
Yeah, exactly. I some of my managers say they miss it, right? Because they don't code nearly as much as they used to. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed getting to talk to you about your experience with Sabio and the work that you're doing today.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. Thanks for having me.